before we wrap up this particular block, take a commercial. You'll probably have noticed I've had a few thoughts and a few ideas about how we got into this mess, the lack of transparency about how we got into this mess, and how it's curious that a few individuals were allowed to put the entire system at risk, bonus themselves hundreds of millions of dollars, and now the American taxpayer finds himself stuck with $1 trillion bill, not to mention the trillions that have been lost in the stock market, not to mention the potential job losses that are still to come on Wall Street. Among those that certainly seem to warrant some questions, those who sought to raise the leverage limits on Wall Street so that they could assume more risk, and then ultimately, it appears, pass it on to the rest of us. Doesn't make you feel real good, does it? The former boss of the SEC testifying before the Senate yesterday, Arthur Levitt, here are his observations on some of the recent activities in the global financial markets. Chairman Levitt says, as the markets needed more transparency, the SEC allowed opacity to reign. As an overheated market needed a strong referee to rein in dangerously risky behavior, the Commission too often remained on the sidelines. Now, again, Mr. Levitt leaving at the end of 2000 as the administration under President Clinton left. Now, remember the testimony from Hank Paulson. At the time, he was the CEO of Goldman Sachs. I'm going to reread it to you here. This is our current Treasury Secretary, who at the time was the head of one of the most powerful investment banks in the world, lobbying, in effect, to raise leverage limits. And I'll read again, if I can get the graphic up here, we'll read this out to you. This is Paulson in 2000 testifying to Arthur Levitt. He says, this is again Goldman and other firms, have for many years urged the SEC to reform its net capital rules, that's leverage, to allow for more efficient use of capital, that's more leverage. This is the single most important factor in driving significant parts of our business offshore so that our firms remain competitive. Anyway, the reason they said they needed it because they said other people were taking that leverage. I should point out, Mr. Levitt did not grant them the exemption that they sought in the year 2000. However, they were able to go back to the SEC in 2004 and get that exemption. They went from 15 to 1 to 40 to 1. They were able to then assume more risk than anybody on Wall Street had ever been able to assume in the history of the financial markets. And as a result, we saw hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses paid out to individuals who had assumed massive amounts of risk. Nothing wrong with that. Here's the question for you. Is it appropriate to assume those bonuses with the knowledge now that the risk was assumed was so far in excess of the capacity of the firms that took it, such that you had to come back to me, you, and every other taxpayer in America in order to bail those who took this risk out? I know that you take a lot of risk every day, Joe Terranova, in your trading activities. I know that you take a lot of risk every day, Pete Nigerian, in your trading activities. I know that you talk to me, Karen, about the fact that whether you're long or short, these days you feel like you have risk any which way. Do you feel it's appropriate, Joe, that individuals are able to retain the capital from excess risk with the knowledge that they were able to pass that risk onto you, me, and everybody else in America?
To me, it's completely unconscionable that this has actually happened. But if you go back to his testimony in Paulson's testimony in 2000, the question I have is, when he gave that testimony, did anyone actually understand what he was talking about? Did they have any knowledge exactly about the marketplace, this opaque marketplace? No one fully understands. And the fear I have, Dylan, is no one understands it now today except for the Mark Fishers of the world and the Bill Grosses of the world.
Go ahead here, Karen. Thoughts?
I mean, I don't know how it got so big, the whole system, but I think somewhere in that politicians were complicit as well as the lobbying efforts of, AIG had an enormous lobbying effort. And now we look at AIG taking down $87 billion, which, by the way, is more than the budget of the state of New York, which is a rather large state with what they generate internally, not from the Fed. That's unconscionable.
Yep.
$87 billion.
Utterly unconscionable, and I recognize it wasn't illegal, but if you're one of those who are able to capture hundreds of millions by being nakedly long the housing market, I suggest you at least think about giving some of that money back, as outrageous as that idea may be. If Bob the plumber's got to give back the house because he took too much risk, if we're going to put all this risk onto the balance sheets of everybody in America, why do you get to keep your bonus? Doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, it doesn't strike me. It's not capitalism. It's stealing. Anyway.